policy and stimulate debate. And the second assumption is that good research communication demonstrates the relevance of research to a wider public. And when we're talking about communicating to a wider public, working with the media is a really successful channel for reaching out to a wider public. So therefore, whilst there are we recognise there are lots and lots of routes to reaching the right people with the information that could influence policy and stimulate debate. If you're talking about reaching out to a wider community, then the media is a key stakeholder for communicating these policy implications. So there are assumptions for the webinar today. As I mentioned just a minute ago, we're going to look at just two different types of reaching out. So if we move on to the next slide, Siobhan, we'll just be really clear about what an op-ed is and what a press release is. We'll look at some examples in a minute so we can be really clear. With op-eds, their opinion and editorials, they really can be a good way to personalise research and an effective tool to explain complex information in a much more conversational way and tone. And we'll talk a little bit about what kind of tone to take when approaching an op-ed or writing an op-ed. Press releases, on the other hand, they're very clear and cost-effective tool. They're also quite concise. We'll look at some examples in a moment. They tend to be written in short paragraphs, and they tend to be very factual documents. Usually they're very newsworthy, timely pieces of information. So perhaps it will be announcing an event or a launch of a book, or announcing that a particular piece of research or an element of research, something new is happening. So these are just two ways. As I say, we recognise there are lots of other ways you can deal with the media, by producing videos or by doing audio pieces or big feature pieces, but these are two quite direct tools that we'll go through in some detail today. So if we start off by looking at op-eds, and on the slide in front of you, you'll see we've identified a few different types of op-eds. The one that we're going to look at is the bottom link there. And this is a piece which appeared on the Guardian website, a UK-based website. And I think what's interesting, before we delve into what makes up a good opinion piece, is to recognise that in the modern world, often op-eds now are mixed in with blog posts. So online you might see them as blog posts, and I think some of the tools and tips we'll go through stand for writing good blog posts as well. But let's have a look at the example that's there on the screen. We've picked out this one. It's very clear, it has a very clear headline. And where we see just underneath the headline where it says managing local conflict is vital to peacekeeping but needs care and continuity, we know straight away when we look at this opinion piece what the angle is that this piece is telling us. It's a very direct piece. It's nicely illustrated with a nice photograph. It's nicely illustrated with a photograph, which immediately draws us into the opinion piece. If we scroll down it, Siobhan, what we can see here is that it's written with short, punchy paragraphs, and whilst it puts across a personal piece, the beauty of publishing op-eds in an online environment is you can obviously include links. So we can see here where the words are blue, that they link to more detailed documents, and in an online environment you can do that, and that's really helpful in an op-ed because you want to keep your piece quite short, quite punchy, quite concise. In an online environment you can give lots of background information without kind of deviating from that format. If it's in a printed format for the newspaper, obviously you've got some limited space, and when we talk about some top tips in a second, one of the things that we say to look out for is to be really aware of your word count, not to be waffly in an op-ed piece, but to keep it very tight and very concise. Scrolling down the bottom of this op-ed example, you can see that when we get to the bottom of the piece, we always end an op-ed with a clear viewpoint. So here the author has chosen to put across the point, international peacekeeping will only be effective when it gives priority to continuity and engagement. We're really sure when we finish the piece what is the point that this author is trying to make. The key thing here as well is you'll notice that the author puts their name and their title. Professor David Leonard here, it's somebody that we've worked with here at IDS. This is put in very clearly so you know why this person is speaking with any authority. Well, what gives them the right to have this view? And again, we can talk a bit in a moment about who should author the op-eds, but whoever is doing it, you need to make sure that they put their name to the piece. In some cases, if people feel uncomfortable putting their name for a piece, if it's controversial, it's very important that they put the organisation or their qualification, if you like, for why they have this opinion. It really does add weight to a piece. It adds validity to a piece. I'm just checking to see if people can hear me okay. I'll just move the microphone just to make sure that people can hear me okay. So if we look in a bit more detail moving forward on the slides to what makes up a good op-ed piece, if we can move back to the PowerPoint slides, please, Siobhan, and then we can go through some of the tips, and then perhaps we can have a bit of a discussion about the piece. There are a few tricks, if you like, a few tricks of the trade to make sure that your opinion piece is well written and therefore likely to be taken up by the publishers, but also crucially be read by the audience. So if we move on to slide 7 in the set, then we'll see that we have come up with key considerations, if you like, for putting together an op-ed piece. It's really important, not just with op-eds, but with any kind of communication to a wider audience, to make sure that it's clear, that it's concise, and that it's topical. And being topical is actually really key to getting it published in the wider world. If you can tap into an event or something that you know people are talking about, an issue that people are talking about at the time, you're much more likely to get your piece published because there's a relevance there, and editors of newspapers and of media outlets will be looking for that relevance to their audience. So it's important to be clear, concise and topical. It's really important to avoid jargon. Our industry is peppered with lots of acronyms, lots of assumed knowledge, lots of big words, and that doesn't necessarily make for a good read. So when you're writing your opinion piece, it is very important to use simple language. That doesn't mean that it's simple thinking, but you need to consider your reader and don't assume that they know the subject as well as you do. So once we've got this in mind, that we're going to be clear and concise and on message, as I say, it is really important to make it relevant, to make sure that it talks to the audience. It's sometimes a really good, when you're thinking about your opinion piece and thinking about where it needs to be published, you want to think about who the audience are that come to that particular newspaper or that particular website, and really think of making it relevant and take into account local data or culture. Make sure that the examples that you use are relevant to the community. And when you do that, you need to make sure that you speak with some authority and clarity so that it really talks to that person. When we looked at the example, we talked a little bit about length. Length is really important. If we're going to be clear and concise, then we need to think about how long this piece should be. It's a good idea when you're thinking about where it's going to be published to be aware of the word count limitations. Where possible, you should contact the newspaper or the website that it's going to be published in and find out how long they like their opinion pieces to be. You might be able to do that without contacting them, just by looking at the other things that they've published. Now, it's important to be aware of the word count for a few reasons, but one of them is to really help you to focus your mind so that you stick to that one crucial message that you're trying to get across. The other is that with opinion pieces, speaking as somebody who's edited these kind of things in the past, it's not an easy job to accurately edit opinion pieces. If you take out one word or change one word, you can change the whole meaning of something. So it's much better if the opinion piece is written to within the word count, and then it doesn't run the risk of being edited and changing the meaning, basically. It's usual, I think the length is usual or a good guideline. I would say in the UK it's around 500 to 700 words for opinion pieces. Aditi, I'd just like to bring you in at this point, because I think you made a point yesterday that actually you think it's more like 800 to 1200 words being the norm for Asian media. Is that correct?
Yeah, 800 to 1000 is what you should keep at. It's better to be 800, 900 words. 1200 is usually only the Hindu newspaper, which carries slightly long articles. But if you write something around 1000 words, 800 to 1000 words, then you're safe. It's because if it's Hindu, then you can just add a bit. If it's Times of India, you can subtract 100 words. So you would need to do that because they are very particular about the word length.
Okay.
And they don't want to edit it themselves. They would rather get exact words from the writer.
Excellent. It's a good point. To look at the, as I say, the different publications, because they will vary slightly, but for a good guidance, 800 to 1000 words or 800 to 1200 words would be a good guidance for those pieces. It's important also to think about the tone when you're writing an op-ed piece. Opinion pieces need to be passionate. You need to know your subjects, and you need to speak passionately to really engage the audience, to draw them in. But what you don't want, what doesn't make for a very good opinion piece, is to be really emotional or accusatory. It kind of turns the reader off. You want to bring them in with the passion, but you don't want it to be a big rant. So therefore, you need to think about your tone being respectful to the audience. They work best, op-eds work best when they are very authoritative in tone, but they're very clear and they're very credible. So getting the tone right is really important. And a top tip I would suggest here is, when you've written your opinion piece, is to read it and reread it. But quite often it's quite good to read it out loud. Listen to how it sounds when you actually say the words, to make sure that it is clear and that you haven't got lots of jargon or words that sort of trip over each other. But just to get that tone right, you really don't want it to be shouting, you just want it to be clear and authoritative. When we think about choosing the messenger, we've put it as a point here. We saw in the example that we had there that it's really important to actually credit who is writing this piece, whose voice is it, and what gives them the authority. Opinion pieces do tend to be taken more seriously if they're signed by a known individual in the community, or if they're signed by someone with a position or a job title that's recognised. It just makes it really clear as to how they know about the subject. However, it doesn't always have to be the head of an organisation that writes the opinion pieces. It may be the case that actually, you know, there are young and talented researchers who really know their subject well and are very passionate about the piece. So I would never suggest that it needs to be the head of an organisation. It just needs to be somebody who knows the subject very well and can present a clear and authoritative piece. It may well be in organisations that that person writes it and then it is overseen by somebody from the communications team or another person within the team, just to get the tone absolutely right. But whoever it is important, as we've seen in the example, to really spell out who it is that's making that point and what position they hold. So let's move on a little bit in terms of our bullet points to think about submitting your article. When you submit your article, there are a couple of things that just make it easier for the journalist at the other end. If you're sending your article in via email, a good tip is to cut and paste the text of it and actually put it in the body of the email. Often journalists don't open attachments from unknown sources, It can just be because they've got big attachments that clog up their mailboxes, but of course it can be, as we all know, that if you have an email from an unsolicited source, you're a bit wary about opening an attachment in case it damages your computer. So where possible, cut and paste the text into the body of the email and send it directly to a named contact. It can be a bit hard to find out who to send your piece into. So what I would suggest is, once you've thought about who the audience is that you want to reach, and you've thought about the source of media, so which newspaper, which website, or perhaps which radio station. Sometimes op-ed pieces can actually be spoken rather than written. But you identify which outlet you want this piece to go to, and then do a little bit of research to see, okay, who do I need to send this to? Who does it need to reach? And send it directly to them. And sometimes, and we'll come on to this when we talk a bit about press releases in a moment, sometimes that might be more than one person in an organisation. It might be several desks that you send it to. It might be the heads of a particular desk, or it might be more junior researchers as well. But when you send it, as I say, cut and paste it into the body of an email rather than sending it as an attachment, and you've got much more chance of somebody opening it. We've put this note down to say do your homework, and this is really important, I think, when you're thinking about communicating your research or your recommendations to a wider audience, is to really think about who it is that you think it's important to reach. Different newspapers, different websites obviously have different demographics in terms of their audience profile, and it's good for you to just do a bit of desk research to really think about who is likely to read these pieces. Those media outlets will then have different styles, so read the different opinion pieces that they've already published and try to follow that style. It will increase the chance of being accepted. As Aditi mentioned just a moment ago, editors with opinion pieces, editors don't really want to change the wording. So if you can get it on message and in a style that the audience will recognise, then you've got a lot less chance of the editor playing around with the text. And finally, on our short top tips list for op-eds, we've put down never get dejected. And we're saying that because you may well have your op-ed rejected. Some of the world's best authors didn't get their work accepted on the first try. So it's important to try again, to resend pieces in. Perhaps if you send something in and it gets rejected, perhaps have a look at it in terms of the style. Really think about if it's appropriate for the audience for that particular media outlet. And have a look and think about, have I really got my message across? One message is great, one strong message is really good in an op-ed. You can extend that out obviously to 2 or 3 messages, but it's a good idea to try and link that all together so that it's a really clear piece. As I say, read through the piece to make sure that it doesn't have any jargon in it, that it's written in a very coherent language, that it's correct, that it's balanced and it adheres to the word limit. There's also sometimes just, you may put barriers in people's ways for actually opening it when it lands on someone's desk. So if it's written in a tiny, tiny font and it's very difficult to read, people are more likely to move on to somebody else's piece. So if you do get rejected, your piece gets rejected, have a look at the piece and then resend it out to perhaps some other people in the organisation, or look for some other sources. So I'm going to pause there for a moment. I'm conscious I'm doing a lot of talking. I'm going to pause there and just see if we have any questions on the op-ed process before we move forward to look at press releases.
So I have unmuted you all. You're more than welcome to address your questions now to the panelists. I noticed, Mary, that you've had your hand up for some time. Would you like to make a comment or ask a question? Happy, please go ahead and ask your question now.
Yeah, hi. This is Aditi. I just wanted to ask for the OPET piece. It has been shared that if we have one strong message instead of like 2, 3 messages, is that something to be followed very in a strict sense, or can we have smaller messages around that one big message in one piece?
Sorry, you
Can
may
you
need
hear
to
me?
repeat your question again, Happy. Unfortunately, there was a lot of noise on the line, so we couldn't hear you properly. Subsequently, I've muted everybody so we can hear you better. Would you mind repeating your question, please? Sorry.
Sure, sure. Yeah, Shivan. We just heard, all of us, that in one OPET piece, one strong message would be good, right? I was just wondering that can we not, is this something to be followed in a very strict sense, or can we not have 2, 3 related messages? Because you are right, OPET piece is generally about 1,000 words, so the space is very tight, but 2 to 3 messages around that main message. How does that work?
Would you like to come in, Aditi?
Yeah, no, perfect, Happy. What you're saying is fine as long as you have one strong message and 2, 3 related messages to it will perfectly work. So in terms of those who are not very used to writing op-ed, then the tool would be to write what one strong message is and then to break it up into A, B, and C, maximum C, that these are the 3 related points which substantiate my larger message. And that would be fine because you have to pad it up, so to speak. That's the jargon that we use. The only what I was trying to say was that you cannot have 2 or 3 large messages in one 1,000 word article, because it's important that whatever one message you have enough substance so that people then believe what you're writing. And when you're writing that substance, that itself will use up your 1,000 words, right? So perfectly, what you're saying is perfectly fine, that you have 1 or maybe maximum 2 strong points and then sub 1 or 2 related points to substantiate that. And the other thing that I wanted to say was that often if you are looking at op-eds and the fact that they relate to current affairs, and that's why a lot of newspapers pick them up, you can also be a little ingenuous, something like elections. Anything can link up to elections. So you can talk about really anything. You can talk about child mortality. You can talk about, what's going to happen with climate adaptation plans, state climate adaptation plans, about which no one is talking about once a new government comes in, how it will impinge on economic growth. So the first sentence that you're saying, yes, it needs to be very important to showcase what you have to show about research. But if it doesn't lend itself to it organically, you can also be very ingenious, very creative, and link it to some current happening, either national or state or global, depending on which newspaper you're selling it to, and then get on to what you have to say. And it's always a good, it's a good strategy then, in case you're being creative and creating this link, is to come back to it at the end of the article, so that you begin with that link and then you say what you have to say, and then you just come back to the beginning, to that point, and kind of sum it up. So that kind of holds it together, and the reader feels, well, yes, that person is really talking about a different dimension of this current affairs which is happening. Yeah, I hope I'm clear as to what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Aditi, for your tips.
Welcome.
Are there any other questions on the floor before we move on? If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Just want to check that, Mary, you've had your hand raised for some time now, and I want to check you're unmuted now, whether you have a question. You can speak, Mary, if you'd like. Unfortunately, we can't hear you. So I'm going to move on to a question that's come via the question pane. It's from Suranjan. He's asking, apart from these three considerations or key considerations for op-ed, excuse me, do we also need to have a flow of what we want to convey, i.e. similar to a kind of flow of a story?
I think that's a really good question, actually, because yes, I think you do need to consider the flow of it. You need to be really clear about the messages that you're putting across, but it also needs to be a good read. People tend to read opinion pieces, not necessarily, how can I put it, it's not like reading a news story, it's not like reading a hard factual news story. Opinion pieces are very personalised pieces, and are therefore, they need to be an enticing read. So I think it is a good idea to actually think about, yes, quite clearly which points you want to put across, but also how you're going to put them across and the flow of it. And I would say that, as I was saying before, to read out the opinion pieces when you've written them, to read them out loud, really helps you to get that across, to get that flow and get that tone right. I hope that answers your question. Are there any other questions to take at this point, or shall we move on to press releases? Okay, so I would take it that we should move on to look at press releases. Siobhan, are you okay? Great, thank you. So moving on to look at something which is much more, a format which is probably a bit more familiar to us. Looking at press releases are a very good and cost-effective way for announcing activities or research outputs that are newsworthy. Editors do receive hundreds of press releases, and if you want yours to stand out, you need to make sure that it's clear and engaging. I was saying to the group that we had yesterday that many years ago I used to work for a publication called BBC English magazine. It was a language teaching magazine, and I used to get lots and lots of press releases announcing new textbooks, new classroom materials coming through, and I found it really hard to choose which one should we actually review in the publication. And I have to confess, because I had so many of them, if a press release came through that was really clearly written, really clearly laid out, something that I could easily use and work with, perhaps if it came with some nice images from the book, I was much more likely to use those press releases and publish reviews of those books. So when we think about a press release, we're going to go through what will make a good press release and what are the kind of key elements to make sure that you have in your template. But you'll see on the screen, we've put up a screen grab of a press release that was sent to a newspaper, and I'd just like you to just have a look at it, and perhaps we can open up just to see what people think about this as a press release. You can see there that we've got this intron retention is widely recognized as a consequence of missplicing that leads to failed excision. I mean, quite frankly, already I'm a bit lost with it, but I wonder what you think of it as an example of a press release. What goes through your mind when you look at that?
I need it.
Okay, you're welcome to share your comments now if you'd like to. Are there any comments that you'd like to make?
How to make comments?
You can make them verbally now because I've unmuted you all, so
Okay,
please feel free to speak.
Yeah, this is happy. I feel, you know, a quick look of it, at least to me as a layperson, this has a lot of jargon. So it's not really clear to, if I were the editor, if I was the person who has to decide, this has a lot of technical words used in the press release. I don't know if you could hear me.
Yes, that was great, Happy. Thank you for your contribution. Govinda, you have your hand raised. Would you like to make a comment?
No, I had a question on opiate, because to Aditi, actually you are talking of key messages from the research outcomes. But you know, as researchers, we have a specific orientation and we even write in the journals, that is accepted. But that same materials, how to convert into in the newspaper, in the print materials.
Okay, so I think if I hear that question correctly, what you're saying is that research outputs perhaps are more commonly published in peer journals or in academic journals, and if those messages are the same when you're communicating them to the wider audience, is that?
Yes, yes. If I want wider audience through these newspapers, so how I can change it to the newspaper material?
Mm-hmm. The point there is to really think about the audience and to think, as I say, about the tone of them and the language that you use. So you might be still taking the same message, if you like, but rewording it for the audience. It's the same driver, that you still have the same evidence, if you like, that's come out of your research, but it is really in the language and the way that you describe things. So actually, if you look at the example on the screen at the moment of a press release, this to me is a very poor example of a press release. There is clear message that's come out of this research, is clear to the researchers, and perhaps if this piece were to appear in a more academic journal, it might make sense to people, because it does, I think as Happy was saying before, it does have lots of assumed language, lots of jargon within it. And so the message to a wider audience here is really unclear. I have no idea what intron retention is, and the description that's there doesn't really help me. If this appeared in a peer review journal, it might make more sense to the audience, because it's something that speaks to them. But to be used as a press release, to be used for the wider public, it doesn't help me to understand the research. Clearly at the top of this press release we have a lot of names, and I don't know who all these people are, I don't know what their positions are, I don't know what leads them to be the authorities in these pieces, and I would suggest that actually this press release, if you like, has just been cut and pasted. It's been lifted from a wider journal and is actually more akin to an abstract. It has a reference number there and links through to a PDF. I don't think it's a press release at all. I think it's just been lifted and cut and pasted and sent out in the hope that some journalist will pick it up and use it. I don't know many journalists that would touch this, because it needs far too much work doing to it. So I think in terms of your points of how do I take the research outcomes and change the messages for different audiences, the messages stay the same. It's the language that you use to describe them that's different. You have to unpack it a bit more for a wider audience. You have to make it really transparent and avoid all of that jargon and assumed language. Aditi, would you like to come in at this point?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because most researchers find it very difficult to dumb down, if I may say that, to dumb down their research findings. And you have to do that. So yes, of course, the language has to be simple, no academic jargon, of course. But what you have to do is to find out what is it that will have a larger public appeal. What is that core finding that you really think when you share it with the larger public will change the way people think or change the way that policymakers who read it might think. So from your research findings, you may not even pick up a whole finding. You may only pick up a part of it, which may not be core to your research findings. However, it may still have that propelling effect, and it may lend itself to the media space. It may not lend itself to a more policy-focused or a more peer-reviewed journal-focused space. So I think it's important to understand when you're doing research, and this is part of the behavioral change aspects that we talk about when we're talking about researchers, that let us not be very parochial when we are looking at research findings. Let us also broad vision ourselves and see what are those interesting things which we can use other platforms to share with the larger public. So it's important to your research may not, in other words, your research may not be as friendly to a media space as it is to some other channel. However, from your research, there will definitely be 2 or 3 things which will be friendly to the media space. And as you start discovering that and writing in the media, you will find that actually the 2 go hand in hand. So, some of it you can write in the media, and some of it you can then write in peer-reviewed journals or in policy briefs. And it's very important for people who want to write in the media to read the op-eds. The more you read, the more your brain will start thinking, oh, ye to main bhi likh sakta tha. Oh, I can also write this. Oh, this is a point that I can expand on this. That's how you start thinking. When you read more, so you just say every week I'm going to read at least 3 op-eds, and then you can start doing that. Okay.
I think that's an excellent tip, Aditi. The more that you read, the more media that you consume around the subject really helps you to make it relevant and have that hook in. I think that's a really good top tip to take away from it. If we move on with the press releases, so we've had an example here of I would suggest a very poor press release, and Siobhan, if we move on to the next slide, we've got an example of a better press release. I've included the link there, and we can just open it up and have a look at it. Press releases usually are written, you'll see here, in a very clear font, so it's very accessible. Where possible, it's good to include things like the logo of the organisation right at the top, and to make it appealing for somebody to read. We'll go through some top tips in a second, but if we look through this press release, right at the very top, I don't know if you can scroll right to the top, Siobhan, to see, you'll see there we've got embargoed until 11:30 hours. It's good to think about when you're writing your press release of the timeliness of it, of the relevance. As we're saying, press releases are very often issued in relation to an event, perhaps a physical event, a meeting somewhere, a conference, a speaker somewhere, or it's linked to a piece of news, a launch of something. And it may well be that you want to send this information out, or you should send this information out in advance of that event, but you don't want the information to actually be released till a certain time. So you can send it out a few weeks before, but clearly tell the journalist, actually, this is for your information only, and it's embargoed until this time. Moving down this press release, you can see it has a very clear title there. We know that this is saying here that the NCAER has received a gift, and therefore we can see that exactly what we're getting into here, what this piece is about. The press release as a whole here is written in very sort of short, punchy paragraphs. It's quite often you'll see press releases that are written as bullet point lists, and that's entirely appropriate, because what you're trying to do is less about thinking about the story and the flow of it that we saw with op-eds, but you're really trying to impart some factual information through. And you want to do that in a really clear and concise way. The overall length of the press release tends to be about a page and a half. You can go on sort of 2 sides of A4, but no longer than that. We can talk a little bit about word counts in a moment, but really you want to keep it short and concise and very clearly and factually written, making sure that you've got key names and key dates and all the sort of central information to the news that you're imparting to the journalist. As you can see, compared to the previous example that we just looked at, this is a totally different approach. And I think it's a much more appealing approach. It's much clearer in its tone and in the language that's used here. If we can move back to the PowerPoint slide, Siobhan, we can go through some of the essential tips and facts that might help you to write your own press releases going forward. So here we are on slide 10. We can see that we've pulled out a few things just to bear in mind. And as I say, these slides and some accompanying resources and notes will be sent round afterwards, so hopefully we can make sure that you have a little kit, if you like, for going forward and writing your own press releases. So when we're approaching writing a press release, we must make sure that, as we say, it's clear, concise and topical. Just as we talked about with op-eds, having 1 or 2 key messages to get across is central to your press release. You don't want to cram it full of too much information. I think at this point we have a question from the floor. I'm seeing in the chat window that we have: the story of change should be reflected in the press release or the op-ed or not. The story of change. Well, the story of change, actually, op-eds is quite a good format for talking about change in research and the impact that it might have. I would say press releases, you have to be really clear as to what the change would be. It needs to be newsworthy. So press releases, you see lots of press releases where actually it's not really news, it's just business as usual and someone wants to shout about it. And busy desk editors will really look to see what's the link, how does this resonate with the discussion that's going on, what is the news, what's the angle, what's the hook for this piece. So it's really a good idea to think about the format, if you like, for whether or not it should be an op-ed or a press release. When we talk about something being newsworthy, and Praveen, I can see that you've sent in a question, what is newsworthy? It can vary from country to country, and you're right, and that's why I think Aditi's point about reading around subjects and doing your homework, tapping into what are people talking about at that time and thinking about the media outlet. So if you're printing something or want something printed in a more local newspaper, tap into some examples from that community so it will resonate with them. It's newsworthy in that area. Aditi, have you got some good examples that you could add to this point?
Well, the first kind of approach, the first approach to take whether something is newsworthy or not newsworthy is, I don't know how many of you were in Kathmandu, but the whole thing about having an internal view and an external view. That if you were to read it external to your institution, would you still find it interesting or not? That would be newsworthy. In a more kind of rational thought, you think, well, are you adding to the public information that already exists, and are you adding something new? That's one, or a different dimension or a different take to it. And secondly, how interestingly are you adding it? Because, you know, often we also repeat what may be already there out in the public domain. But if we say it in a more interesting fashion, or we add a little more dimension to it, then that could also be interesting. And of course, the third is that if you're just adding to something that's already there in the public debate, that could be newsy, not so newsy, depending on you know, how authoritative is your research findings, what's your sample size, what is the depth of what you're saying, does it really make a difference? That's part of it. The second part of it would be how well you actually deal with the media and getting it in that limited space that they have. So it's both. It could be newsy, but still there might be no space. So we're not talking about that at all yet, as to how do you deal with the media. But in terms of what is newsy, the first thing is to sit outside the organization and look at it. And secondly, to see whether you're really adding something new or only you think that there's something new. So in a way, all the literature review that you do, all the context setting that you do, all that becomes very handy when you're trying to analyze whether something is really newsy or not. Because if you're adding to that literature review or if you're adding to that context analysis, in a way that's simple and you're able to write it in a way where it engages the public imagination, then yes, it's newsy. But if you're not doing that, if you're only repeating what we already know, then it won't be very newsy. I hope that helps, but it's something that comes with practice. But the best is to just take an external view.
I think that's a good tip, to really think about, if I didn't work in this organization, or if I wasn't affiliated to the research or to the message I'm putting across, would I want to know it? What does it tell me? What's different about it? So if we return then to our list of top tips, the thing that we have there at point number 2 is around the headline. Your headline on your press release really sells the story, and it needs to be punchy and it needs to be concise. What I would say with writing punchy headlines is that your headline is really something that convinces somebody to actually open it and read your press release. It should be attention grabbing and it should be immediately understood. You don't want to be too wordy in it. Again, you don't want to have jargon in it, but what you tend to see as well is sometimes people try to be a bit too clever with their headline and perhaps make it funny or humorous. They might sometimes try to make it, the words are almost like a rhyme. It's not a good idea. Your headline in your press release just needs to be really clear and sell your story, tell you exactly what this piece is about. So I just think a good rule of thumb, certainly when I worked for the BBC, was to have no more than 6 words in a headline. It doesn't always work because some languages are longer than others and it doesn't always work. But think about a short, punchy headline that just tells me really clearly what this document's going to be about. We mentioned a little bit in the example about including dates and contacts. In press releases, it's really clear to make sure, really important to make sure that all the information you need people to know is clear. If you're announcing an event, for example, you need to tell people, when it's happening, where it's happening, who they can contact for more information. It's an easy thing to kind of get carried away and forget that you've got to have some really obvious information in there. So make sure that you clearly spell out dates and contacts. Contacts can also be there for contacts for more information. If this press release has landed on someone's desk, an editor's desk, a journalist's desk, and they want to follow up and supplement it perhaps with more information, who do they need to contact to do that? So it's always a good idea to make sure that you have a key contact name in there. And when I say that, it really has to be the contact of the person who would give you more information. So not necessarily the head of an organization, but the person who really could add more to the story. When you're writing your press release, as we saw, the press release should be written in very short, sharp paragraphs. Your first paragraph should really tell the whole story. So if I don't read any further forward, I need to know from the headline and the first paragraph, what am I being told? It's really important that the opening of the press release gives me all the information that I need. Using quotes in a press release is actually a really good idea. You want the quotes to be short, you don't want them to be too long, you want them to be very clear, and you want to attribute them. So I would suggest that using perhaps 1, maybe 2 quotes, you don't really want much more than that, is a really good way to kind of personalize a press release. It makes it a much more communicative tool, if you like. It really personalizes the research. It makes it more credible as well. So as I say, you don't want too many quotes. You want them to be kept short and you want them to be kept punchy, and you do want to attribute them, but they are a good thing to include in a press release. With anything that you're submitting, whether it be an op-ed or it be a press release or it be a longer feature. You need to look at the spelling and the grammar. Make sure that you read your piece before you submit it. Reading it aloud, as we said before, is a good top tip, and ask somebody else to proofread the press release. That could be somebody from a communications team. It could just be a colleague. But make sure that you've got the spelling right and that the grammar is accurate, because you want your press release to look as professional as possible, and it therefore means that it's much more credible if it goes out accurately written. A tip in terms of sending material off, if you have got strong relevant photographs or images or logos, then it is a good idea to make it known in the press release. I wouldn't necessarily send big files over if you're emailing the press release over, because sending big picture files can clog people's inboxes, and as we said before, if desk editors and journalists are receiving emails from people they don't know, they're unlikely to open them. But if you do have good, strong, relevant images, then you should either just mention in the press release that images are available and say who to contact to get those images, or if you're working in an environment where you can upload them, if it's a video clip, for example, that you want to send along to accompany a piece, then uploading it into a website like YouTube or somewhere where you can just send the link rather than sending the big file. That's a really good idea. Aditi, I know that you have some experience where we were talking yesterday about particular newspapers having their own photograph desks, and that it's more likely that perhaps people will send photographers along and use their own photographs. Is that right?
For events, yes, but it depends. The smaller, I think in the States, if the smaller newspapers, the regional newspapers, they would use photographs that you might be sending. But definitely the national dailies in the metros will not be using the photographs that you will be sending. So it's a very important thing to note that whenever you send a media invite and a press release, please send a media invite or a press release also to the chief photographer if you want them to cover your event, so that even if the reporter doesn't come, sometimes if only the photographer comes, the photographer's job is simpler. He just has to sit on his scooty and go from a function to function, take a photo and move on. A reporter usually has to spend more time, and so they can cover less functions. So it's best that if you get a good photo, especially if you've got a dignitary or some photo op, then if you have a good photo, then it could just be a caption story, or you could even get 3 paras from your press release if it's a good press release with the photo in a newspaper. So do not forget the chief photographer's invite. Please do send that. And if you're sending a feature article, not an opinion piece, not an op-ed, but if you're sending a feature article, a news feature, so to speak, and there are several feature pages in newspapers, then you can send a photograph, and sometimes it does get used. But like I said, mostly national newspapers, they will not use your photographs, but keep photographs, because smaller newspapers and your web-based media will use it.
Excellent. Thanks, Aditi. And finally, on our list of top tips for press releases, we have this targeted distribution. With any contact with the media, it's really worth thinking about, where do you want this resulting story to go? Who do you want to reach with this information? And so you think about which newspapers you want to contact. As we said before, think about who their audience is. Look at those newspapers. Look at the kind of stuff that they're covering. Look at the websites and read the kind of events or news that they are likely to cover. And when you send your press release in, you may well be sending it to more than one person. It's a good idea when you're sending your press release in to send individual emails to each of those individual people. Make it much more targeted. People are more likely to read things if they think it's just for them. But send it separately. Send a separate email to each media house. And really target the different desks. So it may be that you're sending it to more than one person in an organization. Always a good idea to send an additional copy to the resident editor, or to the bureau chief. It may not be them that ultimately picks up on it, but to keep them informed. But don't worry about sending lots of copies to lots of different people in one organization, because if you're contacting a newspaper or a website, they're going to be having a lot of information coming through, and it's a good idea to just make sure that you really shout about your event. It's important and you want them to know about it. So think about who you want to send it to, what type of publication, and then send lots of different people in that organization your press release. So that's a bit of a quick tour, if you like, through press releases. Before we just move on, does anybody have any questions about the points that we've raised there?
There was one question from the floor earlier. It came from Suranjan, and he was asking whether press releases are not generally targeted to all readers. It might be intended to a specific personnel who could really understand it, as in the present slide, which I think links to your final point, Kelly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is thinking about the targeted distribution. Oh, sorry, I could hear lots of sound. It is thinking about who the audience is, who do you want to reach with it, and it may well be that you adapt the style, the language, if you like, just thinking about the different types of audience, if you know the publication. Press releases on a whole tend to be for a very generalist audience, they're for a wider public. So that's why you would write in this kind of clear way and not have jargon there. But it is really worth just taking a step back before you think about writing a press release and think about, well, who do I need this to go to? Who is the audience I want to inform? Which does actually, Siobhan, if we can move on to the next slide, that's very much about thinking about the message, and I think that might help.
We have a question from Avra, if that's possible to speak now.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Avra.
Actually, Siobhan, this is Fatima here.
Oh, hi, Fatima.
Hi. Actually, can you hear me?
Perhaps you could move a little closer to the microphone.
Okay. Okay. Here. About the press release, because we are in the press release, I had earlier a question on op-ed, but maybe we can leave it for now, for the last 15 minutes. About the press release, you mentioned about the fact that press releases can, there can be a variety of types of press release, meaning press releases written for various purposes. The two purposes mentioned was announcing the events and also disseminating the research outputs. Announcing the events is okay. I mean, I understand that, like the NCAR's press release that we have seen. But for the research outputs, when I was reading through all the points and listening to the elaborations on the key considerations, I was trying to relate it to what we do at CPD and why don't we do some of the things that are being said. What we do at CPD for disseminating research outputs, we never send out press releases. We rather go for a press conference and we allow the different press, electronic and print, to pick up their own points from the deliberations at the press release, at the press conference, because there are so many important points, and we actually like it. We choose to disseminate that way, so that many different points are picked up by different media, so that a lot of things are covered in the media. And some people, sometimes what they do is they pick up maybe one or 2 points one day, and next day they elaborate. I mean, they pick up they make series of news on that. That is the advantage we get by not sending press release, and we actually find it helpful. But on the hindsight, what happens is the media sometimes misunderstands or misleads or deliberately, uses some of the findings in a negative way. And that also happened in some of the cases. But when that happens, we really have to deal with it. I mean, and we have done it in the past also. It's not a happy thing to do happen, but it happens. But I mean, for CPD, I mean, writing press releases to disseminate research outputs, we find it really very, I mean, like all the media will be writing the same notes, I mean, same points, because I only want to highlight 1 or 2 points, let's say. And they will highlight, all of them will highlight only those points. But so many 10 other points are missed because I wrote a press release. So I just want to comment on that. And one more comment, just a comment, maybe someone, Aditi or Kelly, can explain. 2 examples that were shown here. One press release was on the research output. The other press release was actually announcement of an award. 2 very, like the academic press release, as you said, it was a poorly written press release. The other one, very nice, the NCIR's thing was very nicely written. But 2 different examples made it, didn't carry the good message for us, those who are here to learn. And maybe a good press release, properly written, following all the key considerations, but the academic press release would have been really good for us to compare and understand how this should be written.
Thank you.
2 comments only. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima. Would you like to come back and respond to the comments that were made, Aditi?
Okay. Thanks, Fatima. I think what you've raised are very, very critical points as far as researchers and press releases and sharing of research messages is concerned. I think what you're doing is just wonderful. Definitely, press conferences have a very important place to play as far as research findings are concerned. It's just that at this particular webinar, we decided that we would focus on 2 things, op-eds and press releases, because of time constraints. And one of the points that we made yesterday was that even at a press conference, it is always a good idea to also have a press release. And the idea behind that is that whatever, as an institution, whatever research findings you want to highlight, you will then put in the first para of the press release. And there are, and again, what you pointed out was very right. It had come up yesterday, that, and I think it's there in my video, that if you have 5 different research findings, then go to the media 5 times. And as you very rightly point out, that in a press conference, different reporters will pick up different things from the same lecture that they listened to, right? And that's something that's very important for us to realize. It also then again makes the importance of press release even more, so that we are very sure, you might write a press release and a reporter might not pick it up at all, which happens very often. They still may go ahead and write what they want to. That's fine. But still, it's important that we get the message out there in a written press release. And I'm sure you do have press releases when you do your press conference. The other advantages of press release and why we picked up press release was that, organizing a press conference is an expensive affair, not only in terms of money, but also in terms of time and energy. That's something that you would agree with. Just getting media people to come to a press conference is, just requires a lot of time and energy. The second point is that sometimes you might not require a press conference. If you've had, say, 4 press conferences in a year, you might, if you send out another 4 press releases in that year, in addition to the press conferences, you will suddenly find that things that you did not consider very important, but when you write it in a press release and send it to the newspapers, serve 2 purposes. One, it keeps your organizations, it gives space to what you're doing in the newspapers at a far cheaper rate, not in terms of money, but just in terms of time and energy. And 2, it continues to build bonds with that media, so that the media then expects you that, okay, something that will come from there, and then they will come to your newspaper, to your conference when you have it. And the third advantage is that if something is happening externally, then they might think, oh, let's call up this lady and find out what they have to say about it, because they are very active with the media. The media often calls the same people to talk about diverse things. Those are the people they want to talk about. So I think a press release is also a way in which you can keep in touch with the media in a more substantial way. The last thing I want to say about the press release is, again, something that came up yesterday, was that if you have written down your main research findings in a press release, that is what you want to say. And when you're speaking, and then you've done your homework, this is what you have to say, and then you stick to it, and don't get led by the journalist into saying things that you don't want to say, but you keep coming back to your messages. It helps you from getting misrepresented. And that's a very important thing to remember. At a press conference, it's even more important to do your homework, so that you don't get led astray, especially in a country, where like Pakistan, or now in India when the elections are there, or in some of the states where there's a lot of naxalism. It's very easy for journalists to, get back to these issues and say, well, what do you think about that? Your research doesn't seem to, reflect what is happening, and so to get political. And so if we put it down in a press release, it also helps clear in our, make it clear in our minds that, well, this is what we need to be saying. So that is why there is an importance of press release more than what we really think, and it's always good to have it written down. The last thing that I want to say is that in terms of academic research, how do you then make a press release? Like I said about op-eds, it's good to read. I think it's very important to identify a couple of organizations that do research and then to read about it. I worked in Oxfam, and let me tell you, Oxfam does a lot of studies. They may not be doing very academic studies, but they do a lot of studies, and they always have a very strong media work that follows all studies. So it would be very useful if you just go to the Oxfam GB website. Oxfam International website also has it, but the strongest Oxfam within the Oxfam International Confederation on this particular aspect is Oxfam GB, and you see some of the media releases coming out from their studies, and see how they make use of the media, of a press release or media work in response to a study. And I am very happy to talk about you or to send you certain examples later if you want to do that, and our email IDs are going to be there in the resource kit that Kelly prepares, and I'll be willing to interact more with you on that. But let me tell you, you're doing some fantastic work, and you can really value add to that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Aditi. We have 5 minutes left before the webinar officially closes, although we can have a few moments now to respond to questions that you may have. For example, Fatima, I know you had a question earlier about op-eds, which you didn't have an opportunity to pose to the panelists. So please give yourself 30 seconds thinking time. This is your time to address the experts in this field. I know that Happy would like some more tips for providing regular press releases or sharing information with the press. Is there any tips that you can give us, Aditi or Kelly, before we close that would be useful to our audience?
Just to add.
Well, I can.
Sorry, go ahead, Aditi.
Kelly.
Go ahead, Aditi. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
Okay. Okay. No, I just wanted to say that, something that, in fact, I started my video with, and I'd like to repeat it here, is that sometimes it feels that it's very difficult to work with the media. I think the first point that we need to take is that whether we want to work with the media at all or not. And I think in today's day and age, we should try and use the potential of media. Whatever research we might do, I think the days of research lying on the shelves is long over. This is not to say that all researchers have to go to the media. Definitely there are researchers who might want to spend 2 years, 3 years doing research without going to the media, and we respect that. I'm only talking about research that does have immediate action potential, where we do need to go to the media. I think what we need to do is to start trying. It's very important to send that first press release. It's very important to sit with a journalist friend and find out what's wrong with this press release. I thought I did a wonderful job. What went wrong? And to take help from journalist friends. One of the best things to do with the media is to take them as friends. So, now in this email day and age, send them, if there is other knowledge about your research issue, send them a link and say, hey, listen, this is interesting, and this, that, because they're also, remember, journalists are also looking for information. In the process, try and learn from the journalists. I had said yesterday, and I think also in the media, don't try to write stories for journalists. That's their job. They'll do a very good job. But it's important to try and learn from them. You could have a media person in your group. That's fine. Then you're lucky. But even if you don't have a full-fledged media person in your group, whichever journalists you're friends with, show them a couple of press releases. Let me tell you, 10 press releases down the lane, you'll be doing a wonderful job. So just try your hand. Take help from your media friends, from journalists and other media personnel. Once, twice, thrice, 5 times, you'll do a wonderful job. Happy you're there. I don't know whether you've heard, but Vadana Toro as well as CBGA, from where they started and where they are today, in terms of all your budget analysis, which is now lapped up by the media, and when you started. So I think if you do a baseline survey and you see where some of your institutions are, you've done a wonderful job. So just try and try again, and you'll get it. It's nothing big. It's not rocket science. It's just very simple, and you'll just get going very fast. Thanks.
Thank you, Aditi. That's very informative. Kelly, would you like to come in and respond to the question?
Yeah, just to add, I think Aditi's right. It's about sort of, not being fearful of dealing with the media, not necessarily thinking that speaking in a clear way about some of the research means that it's, using simple language doesn't simplify the message in a way. It's still, it's important to just not have research that is gathering dust and is getting out there, but in a really clear and accessible way, and kind of demystify some of the research that we do. Journalists, their job is to print lots and lots of stories, so they will be looking for information, and it's a good idea to, as Aditi says, to speak with journalists and get their feedback on research, but to just build up a dialogue with them. So don't just work with journalists when you want them to tell a story, but keep them in your group, if you like. If you don't know any journalists, if you don't know how to contact them, then quite often in the online age, there are websites and forums where you can go and just start dipping your toe in there and start contributing to those forums and start having discussions. And the more you talk about your research and the research findings, the easier it will be to explain them in a clear way. The only one thing I would say is that if you don't know any journalists by professions, you can practice on people who don't work in your industry. I quite often would explain bits of work to my mum. My mum would go, but I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're working on. And it really helped me to kind of just have to explain and unpack it to somebody who isn't a professional in that field. So the more you talk about your research, the easier it will become to make it clear and concise.
I have a question. And what kind of forums are you referring to that would help people to make connections with the media or to practice communicating their research?
Okay, so certainly, I mean, I can include some examples when we send out the resources list. But in the UK, for example, we have the Guardian Development Forum. So the Guardian's a big UK newspaper that has an online version that particularly looks at development. And they will quite often have discussion. They'll put topics up for people to, you know, members of the public to go in and discuss. So if you're not confident enough to write a full op-ed piece, then sometimes it's quite good to look at some of these newspaper forums where they've got very specific topics that they want to discuss and contribute to those online discussions. You can do that in a relatively low-level way, but it's good, as I say, to try and explain your view and talk in a simplified way about things, but it's also a really good way to make contacts and to kind of understand what angles it is that people are interested in talking about. So I can add some links into the resources list that we send round, but certainly, you know, there are a number of websites. For example, on the BBC News website, they have a program called Have Your Say, World Have Your Say. They're often talking about, you know, different topics. It's a good way to just practice talking about your research.
Aditi, are there any examples that are more specific to South Asia that would be more relevant to the audience that you can think of?
Not that I know, no, not that I think, not that I know of in terms of web-based. But let me tell you, if you just type how do you write a press release, you'll get a lot of websites which will give you, you know, some kind of tips. But in terms of media, I don't think you can learn too much through the web. You need to have a, you know, person. It's a face-to-face kind of hand-holding kind of thing that you require. And one thing that I always recommend is that even if you don't have a media person, do keep a media consultant for a while, just for 3 months, you know, just for 3 months, just for 6 months, and you'll see what a difference it makes. I think CBGA did that initially when they started out, and they didn't have, you know, a media person full-time, but they did keep a media consultant. Even if they just put you in touch with the right journalists, even if they just correct your press release, it's a huge learning process. So invest. You know, the thing is that if you want to deal with the media, you need to invest in media. If you want to, you know, do research, you need to invest in research. If you want to do advocacy, you need to invest in advocacy skills. It's as simple as that. You want to do, you know, learn how to do media work, you need to invest in media skills. Without investing in media skills, a media person, it's not possible to do it. So I would strongly suggest that go in for a media consultant, maybe not full-time, maybe just 2 days a week, you know, but do that, and do it for 3 months, 6 months, whatever your budget allows you to do that. And then, you know, just work with friends once in a while. Once in a while friends work, but otherwise take a more professional view on it, and then that's the only way to move forward.
Thank you, Aditi. I'm moving now to Happy, who wanted to clarify her question before we close. I can take 1 or 2 more questions. We are, I'm afraid, reaching the concluding minutes of this webinar. So this is your opportunity to speak to the panelists, so please do consider posing a question before we close. But Happy, for now, would you like to clarify your question?
Yeah, quickly in 2 minutes. This is to Aditi. As she said that we have been there for some time and there have been success. I mean, I would say that I remember some 2-3 incidents in the past year where our press releases were very successfully picked up by the media. One of the tips that she shared, if the purpose of press release is for covering the events, is like sending it also to the photographer along with the relevant list. Are there some other tips like sending to news agencies? I know sometimes it works better if you send it to a news agency, because then through the news wire it goes to different newspapers and it's picked up, you know, better. So are there some more such useful tips?
You know, the kind of work that CBGA does in terms of budget analysis, etc., definitely news wire agencies are a must. because usually you will have one reporter in a newspaper who might be more interested in what the Ministry of Finance is saying than what an NGO is saying on finance. Finance reporters are a little thick in their heads, sorry, but you know, they are more stereotyped. They aren't willing, they don't think much of NGOs and, you know, independent research institutions. So when we're dealing with the external world, we have to know what is the kind of image we have with the media. So in development research, development stories, it's easier to get media, but finance is difficult. So definitely wire agencies for you must be, and let me tell you, once you get the wire agencies, they'll be far more responsive to you than some of the newspapers. And plus also the Hindi wire agencies. That's very, very important for you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, we're about to conclude the webinar, and this is your opportunity to pose your final questions. Of course, you are invited to write to the two panelists outside of the webinar today, the webinar schedule today. I'm sure if you go away, you may encounter a thought that you would like them to respond to. So please do feel like this is continuing discussion. Before we close, I just want to hand over to Kelly to explain an opportunity which you can all take advantage of as a post-webinar activity. Kelly, would you like to introduce the activity to the group?
Certainly, thanks, Siobhan. Well, just to say, it's been really, really great to make contact with you all today. I hope that that our little information imparting has been useful. Aditi and I have been discussing the possibility that some of you might want to take some time to go away and practice writing op-eds or practice writing press releases. We're going to send out a little resources list after the event today to help you to do that, and the notes from these slides as well we'll send over. If you'd like to practice writing your own pieces, then we're very open to receiving them and to making some comments and some suggestions on how to improve them. So we'll include our contact details in the resources information that goes out to you afterwards. But if you do want to practice and you do want to use us as guinea pigs and as you know, as pretend journalists, then we're very happy to receive your op-eds and your press release over the coming week, and we will give you some detailed feedback specifically on the material that you send through to us. So as I say, I hope you found today useful, and if you do have questions that pop into your head after the event, then please do get in touch with us and we'll do our very best to answer them for you.
Lovely, thank you. So there is an opportunity for you to continue learning and to use Aditi and Kelly as your critical friends. Aditi, would you like to make a closing remark before we conclude the webinar?
I think it will be very useful for research institutions to take media seriously, because unfortunately, at least in South Asia, a lot of media is based on anecdotal evidence. And what really seriously is lacking is good in-depth research coming out in the public, compared to, say, the US, where there's a lot of, and some of the European countries. So I think research institutions do have a very big responsibility to share widely whatever they research on. And while peer-reviewed journals are good, I don't know how many of you saw the video that Siobhan had sent, or maybe I don't know whether I saw it on CJ. I know Siobhan had sent, where there was a researcher who researched on volcanic areas where a lot of people were hurt because he didn't share his findings publicly. So I think it's important that we actually make the media more responsible to society by contributing whatever we have far more seriously to the media. Now, I think it's a two-way relationship that needs to develop. We need to take the first few steps, and let me tell you, then the media becomes very responsive. I remember when I was a journalist, Kalpvriksh was very active, and we used to do a lot of very responsible reporting on environment, quoting Ashish Kothari and Shekhar Singh, and a lot of these people, and Anil Agarwal when he was alive, he changed the way we thought of environment through the media. He didn't write very heavy research pieces, but he changed the way the government of India thought about environment, not only today, but even in the negotiations that are happening. It's a different paradigm that Indian government is taking when they're talking about per capita emissions. So I think it's very, very important to realize that it's critical to catch the public imagination to change anything. Policies don't change top down anyway any longer. I think that there's a huge pressure from the bottom, and we can really contribute to that. Thanks.
Thank you. That's wonderful advice, and excellent way to conclude the webinar. Now, we would love to capture your feedback on the webinar so that we can make improvements. This is one of a 3-part series, communicating with different audiences. The next offering will be focusing on communicating with policymakers. And if there are any ways that we can improve the format, make it more interactive or informative for you, we would like to know. So shortly you will receive a web survey link through your email address. Please, can I encourage you to take a few moments, it will take no more than 5 minutes, to respond to the survey. And this, as I say, will be valuable information for us to shape the program moving forward. So I'd like to thank you all, in particular our panelists, for their informative information today. And I hope that you found this webinar useful. Thank you to you all. I'm going to unmute you now so you can say your final goodbyes. Do take care, and we will speak to you soon.
Unmuted.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. यहाँ से कॉल क्लिक करोगे थैंक यू सुना देगा ना.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
What I was telling you, my point is when you are